Hi everyone, this is the fifth lecture of week 7, and again you can listen to this as an audio, and please read Exodus 11 through 12 before you listen to this lecture. Last time we saw how Moses and Aaron showed up and started a kind of battle of magicians with Pharaoh's magicians, all the battle of which was heightened by Pharaoh's heart being hardened either by himself or with God, who was working to up the drama, okay, so that God can prove that he is the better, more powerful deity for the Israelites to follow. We also saw that as a result of this, Egypt was afflicted with 10 plagues, the last one being darkness. Okay, so notice the setup, the eerie setting, okay, appropriate for Halloween, which is when I'm recording this around. The darkness sets up for the context, sets the context for the final plague, which is the climax, and which is described in Exodus 11 through 12. Okay, now, if you've seen if you watch the History Channel, every once in a while you'll hit upon a show that talks about the Exodus plague, the plagues in Egypt, as maybe something historically based or scientifically based or something like that, so they'll say something like, oh, the Nile turned into blood because of certain bacteria or amoeba or plankton or whatever, okay, and this led to the frogs coming out and blah, 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 okay, and notice, so what do I think of the historical explanations of the plagues? I mean, notice that the historical explanations or the scientific explanations, notice that they undermine the point of the story. Like, this story is about a miracle, something extraordinary that God did, and if you can explain things scientifically or historically, it is no longer a miracle. Okay, so point 1. Point 2, the scientific or historical explanations of the plagues hit kind of a problem when they get to a particular plague. Right, and this is the final plague, right? When they get to the final plague, which is the death of the firstborn of Egypt, this is when the scientific, explanation kind of falls apart, okay? Because there's really nothing that can explain that particular thing. Now, as I said, Exodus 11 sets up for this final miracle or final plague, okay? And, by kind of with God pretty much telling Moses and Aaron how things will unfold, okay? And again, notice that the God of Exodus, is very similar to the God of Joseph in that this is a deity with a plan who seems to have an omniscient idea about how things will unfold in history, okay? And this is what Moses tells the people that the Lord said in chapter 11, Exodus 11, verse 4 and following. And Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go through Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Then there will be a loud cry throughout the whole land of Egypt, such has never been or ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl at any of the Israelites, not at people, not at animals, so that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Then all these officials of yours shall come down to me and bow low to me, saying, leave us, you and all your people who follow you, and after that I will leave. And in hot anger he left Pharaoh. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, in order that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land. Okay, I got it. I made a mistake. So this is a part where Moses explains to the Egyptians, okay, the officials, okay, and to Pharaoh what will happen. Right, which is that, by the way, something terrible is coming. God is about to kill all the firstborn if you don't, let us go. At which point they say, get the hell out of here. And why? Well, it's because God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Okay, so and in this final plague, of course, God, we are told, will strike down the firstborn of Egypt. Okay, but why is this the final plague, or isn't this a problematic final plague? It seems pretty violent, pretty unethical. Okay, notice how the final plague emphasizes how it will be all the firstborn, right? Even if you are like a slave or not an Israelite slave, but if you are a servant, even you will suffer for this. Okay. Well, one way to understand this is that this is payback, right? So remember that the book of Exodus begins by describing how Pharaoh decided to kill all the male Israelite children, right? Thereby trying to kind of cut off the Israelites or genocide them, really. I mean, Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, one explanation of this final plague is to think that this is kind of payback for this earlier act, okay? For trying to kill off Yahweh's people by trying to attack Yahweh's fertility and prowess, okay? So Yahweh now later will kill off Pharaoh's people and attack Pharaoh's fertility, both via the plagues, and which seems to destroy all the agriculture and food production and life of Egypt, but also by targeting the firstborn of Egypt. Okay. Now, with this little summary or kind of foreshadow or telling what's going to happen in Exodus 11, what you expect in the next chapter is for this kind of final plague to be, to take place, right? However, when you turn to Exodus 12, so when you flip, the page, go to Exodus 12, what you get instead is something quite different, right? You get this kind of ritual description of two festivals, one known as Passover and another festival called the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. Okay. Now, most scholars believe that the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread were two different celebrations, probably originally unconnected, and which later, for whatever reason, were put together and then given a new backstory, right? With this kind of, by tying it to this kind of plague, the final plague, the death of the firstborn. Okay, and the reason why you may get rituals, it's not abnormal for rituals to get a new backstory. Okay, the reality is that rituals, what we do, these activities we perform, okay, people keep doing that for a long time. We just keep kind of mimicking the actions over and over again. However, the reasons for the rituals might change. Okay, sometimes they're kind of reformulated or revamped with a different narrative. Okay, sometimes a new story is created as to why we do something. Okay? And something like that seems to have happened with the celebration of these two festivals. Okay? So let's look at Passover first, which is the bigger festival, to be honest. Okay, and of course, Passover is still celebrated. And on the night of Passover, Jewish families will read the entirety of the story of Exodus and the plagues and celebrate this event. Okay. We are told in Exodus that the Israelites, in order to prepare for the coming death of the firstborn Egyptians, okay, indeed to kind of be protected against the plague, okay, this final plague, that they're supposed to take an blemished year-old lamb or sheep or goat, okay, per family, okay, and they're supposed to keep this lamb till a very particular time of the month. One probably thinks that this has to do with the lunar cycle, to be honest, okay? At which point everyone will gather together in that community at twilight. Again, notice this is when, day is turning to night, okay? And so this, space between the heavenly and earthly world, is thin, or this is a kind of liminal point in time. So they're supposed to all gather together, and at twilight, they're supposed to slaughter the lambs all in mass, okay? And you have to, you have to think about the kind of scene of horror that this is, right? With, it's like with all these lambs crying and bleating, okay? And the amount of blood, it really is a kind of terrifying ritual, okay? Once the lambs are slaughtered, the Israelites, we are told in Exodus, are to take the blood of the lamb, probably still quite warm, and put it on the doorpost and the lintel of the house, okay? They are then supposed to eat this lamb roasted whole, which is a very strange way to cook an animal, okay? With this head, legs, and inner organs intact. Again, very bizarre, right? And scary, because a cooked entire animal is pretty horrific looking. And they're supposed to eat this with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, okay? And they're supposed to eat the entire animal, okay? Moreover, this is the manner in which they're supposed to eat it. And this is on chapter 12, verse 11 and following. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that day, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I, the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So this is why it's called Passover. Okay. And so, and right after saying this, okay, the text then moves suddenly into this other festival called the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, where people are supposed to like remove all leavened items from their houses and eat only unleavened bread. This is less connected to the, the Passover event, although there is some connection there where it is said to be the result of them having to quickly leave Egypt. Okay. However, okay, a couple of things to notice. Notice that Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread are only kind of connected. They're probably different. Okay, the first festival, the festival of Passover, which the description of which I just read in the biblical text, likely had its origins as a springtime kind of lamb festival. Okay, a springtime agricultural festival. Really, lambs are born. Okay, they eat like, only their mother's milk, maybe tiny sweet grass. Okay, and they're nice and tender, and they're quite yummy. Okay, it's really the point at which you want to eat lamb. Sorry, vegetarians. So it's probably at this point that they are all killed, right? And this is done as a kind of community-wide celebration. Why? Because this produces probably a lot of meat, right? And you probably need the entire community to help slaughter and do things with the carcass of the lamb. Okay, so a community would celebrate this by kind of eating and slaughtering lambs in mass. Okay, I mean, we still do this kind of stuff, right? With maybe, I don't know, Oktoberfest, and of course, with Easter, lamb with Easter, and there is probably some connection. I'll go into Easter in a bit. This lamb eating festival seems to have been put together with a different agricultural festival, maybe celebrating the wheat harvest, so where you throw out the old wheat and kind of make stuff with the new wheat. Okay, and both these festivals were kind of squashed together and then given a new backstory by being tied or connected to the plagues and exodus from Egypt, especially the final plague. Okay, and that's why scholars think these stories don't quite fit exactly well coherently to the final plague. Okay, we are told that the Israelites did what they were commanded to do. Okay, that they slaughtered the lamb, wiped the blood on the doorposts and lintels. Notice that the blood again is apotropaic, or help protective, helps ward off the evil. Okay, and therefore, as a result of doing this, that they did not die when God, in the form of a kind of slaughtering angel, went throughout Egypt. Okay, and this is 11:29. At midnight, the Lord struck down the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. And then he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Rise, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go and worship the Lord as you said. Take your flock and your herds as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too." Okay, this is probably in chapter 12, not 11. Okay. Now, if you grew up in the church, Passover and this kind of final plague and the preparation for the final plague should ring some bells, okay? And it's not because Christians celebrate Passover as such, okay? But notice, the lamb, unblemished lamb, slaughter, blood, God as an angel of death, the bread thing, the communal eating, this is all reused by the New Testament writers, okay? Some of whom directly correlate Jesus with the Passover, certainly with the Passover and with the Passover lamb in particular, okay? Indeed, there are still questions. I don't know if New Testament scholars have landed on a position. There are questions as to whether the Eucharist is related to or is actually a kind of permutation of a Passover meal, okay? Regardless of the connection between Easter and Passover, this event, the Passover, becomes a fundamental central event in Judaism, and and perhaps with Easter, Christianity as well. Okay, but notice the horror or the horrific nature of this event. Okay, indeed, what we have lost in the modern world is the kind of sense of terror or awe or fear, even that religion and God is supposed to inspire. Okay, God is now like your friend or your buddy or something. But really, this is not probably how most people saw God for a very long time, right? Rather, God was this powerful, otherworldly, scary, king-like authoritarian figure. And these ancient kind of festivals and these ancient stories gives you a kind of sense of feel for how human beings imagined God in the times past. Okay. Indeed, though I can raise questions about the ethics of a God who will go through the land killing all the firstborn of Egypt, and it is problematic, right? Um, you might you might counter this by saying this is really not a fair question to ask, actually. That ancient writers probably did not ask these questions, okay? And the reason why they didn't because it would be ludicrous to imagine that a God who is so different from us, us are, measly human beings, so high, so powerful, so other, right? It would be kind of ludicrous to imagine that he would be bound by human ethics, that this would be laughable, okay? Rather, these stories were perhaps, and this is a reading, meant to inspire awe and fear, okay? To say, really, look how powerful our God Yahweh is, okay? Look what he can do, and look at the damage he can, inflict on other people in order to save his own people, okay? And, if you think about the history of Israel, you can see why the Israelites, especially in dark points in their history, and there were quite a bit of them, might find this kind of really tough, horrific, almost fearful vision of God, this darker and scarier vision, actually rather hopeful and life affirming.